It was Prince Femi. He regarded the two of them coolly, his eyes flicking between Ton and his mother. "Is everything all right here, Inspector?" the prince asked, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of warning. "Just asking a few more questions, Your Highness," Ton replied, turning to face Femi. "There are some loose threads in the king's death, and I'm trying to tie them together." Prince Femi studied him for a moment, his face unreadable. "I understand. But I hope you tread carefully, Inspector. The palace is grieving, and stirring the waters too much could cause unnecessary pain." Ton straightened, feeling the weight of the prince's gaze. Something told him that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous the ground beneath him would become. Inspector Ton stood in the garden, the tension between him and Prince Femi as palpable as the humidity in the air. The prince's calm demeanor masked an underlying threat, but Ton was unfazed. He had spent years navigating the subtle dance of power that surrounded every investigation, and he knew when to push and when to wait. This was a moment for patience. Femi's expression darkened for a brief moment before he smiled, a thin, controlled smile. "Of course. I trust you will find the truth." Without another word, he turned and walked back into the palace, leaving Ton alone with Olori Mareo. The queen remained silent, watching her son retreat into the shadows of the grand hall. Ton could see the flicker of something in her eyes, fear, or perhaps regret. He wasn't sure. But whatever it was, it only deepened his suspicion that more was being hidden from him. "I think we're done here for now," Ton said, his tone neutral. "But I'll be back, Olori. I hope by then you'll be ready to tell me everything." Mareo said nothing as Ton left the garden, but her gaze lingered on the roses she had been trimming. The air felt thick with unspoken words, secrets wrapped tightly in the fold of palace life. That evening, Ton met with Sergeant Connor to discuss the latest developments. They sat in the palace's guest quarters, a modest room compared to the opulence of the royal family's chambers, but it was quiet and private. "There's something going on between Olori Mareo and Prince Femi," Ton said, pacing the room as Connor listened attentively. She hinted at forces beyond her control, something more than just palace intrigue. "And Femi, he's playing a game of his own, but I can't tell what his endgame is." Connor nodded, thinking the possibilities.
"What do you think? Is it about the throne? The prince would stand to gain the most now that the king is gone."
"But there's more to it. It's too clean. Poisoning a king isn't something you do on a whim. This was planned, carefully. Whoever is behind this didn't act alone. I need to find out who's pulling the strings."
"What about the council? Especially Chief Pelican Oluo?"
"He's hiding something, no doubt, but I don't think he's the mastermind. He's too calculated. If he had wanted the king gone, he would have found a more subtle way to weaken him politically, not poison him. No, I think someone used Chief Oluo's opposition to the reforms as cover. So, we're looking at a larger conspiracy here. Isn't it, Detective Tand?" Ton stopped pacing, his mind racing. "The council, the royal family, even the servants, any one of them could be involved. But the note I received said the queen holds more power than she shows. If that's true, then Mareo might be more central to this than we thought."
"What's our next move, Detective?"
Ton was about to answer when there was a sudden knock at the door. He exchanged a glance with Connor before opening it cautiously. A young palace servant stood there, trembling slightly, her eyes wide with fear. "Inspector," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder.
I have something to tell you. But not here. They're watching. Please, meet me in the palace stables tonight, after midnight.
Before Tond could respond, she turned and disappeared into the hallway, leaving him standing in the doorway, bewildered. He closed the door, his mind spinning. What was that about? Peter asked, his voice low. I'm not sure, Tond said, frowning. But it seems we're not the only ones looking for answers. Later that night, long after the palace had fallen into a tense quiet, Tond made his way to the stables. The moonlight cast long shadows across the courtyard, and the palace grounds were deserted. The air was thick with the scent of hay and damp earth as Tond approached the stables, his footsteps nearly silent on the stone path. Inside, the servant girl was waiting, her figure half hidden in the darkness. She was jumpy, her hands ringing nervously as Tond entered. Thank you for coming, Inspector, she whispered, her voice trembling. Tond kept his voice calm. You said you had something to tell me. She nodded quickly, glancing around to make sure they were alone. I overheard something the prince said to the queen. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was cleaning the hallway near the royal chambers. What did you hear? Tond asked, stepping closer.
The prince, he was talking about the king's death. He said something about the plan moving forward as expected. And the queen, she told him to be patient, that everything was under control.
The girl nodded, tears welling up in her eyes.
Yes, I swear it. But you have to be careful, Inspector. They're dangerous. If they find out I told you, they'll...
Thank you, Tond said quietly. You've been very brave. But you need to leave Kajola for a while. Go somewhere safe until this is over. The girl nodded gratefully, and without another word, she slipped out of the stables, vanishing into the night. Tond stood there for a long moment, the weight of what he had just learned pressing down on him. The queen and the prince were involved, just as he had suspected. But what was the plan they had been talking about? And who else was part of it? As he turned to leave the stables, the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Tond paused, his hand instinctively moving toward the holster at his side. Someone was watching. Inspector Tond listened closely, his senses heightened. The footsteps grew louder, then abruptly stopped. For a moment, the silence was suffocating. He scanned the dimly lit stables, trying to catch a glimpse of who might be lurking in the shadows. His hand rested on his pistol, but he held back from drawing it just yet. Whoever it was, they hadn't made their move. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a stack of hay. It was Sergeant Connell, his face tense but relieved. Tond, Connell said quietly, we need to leave. Now. There's something you need to know. Tond, still on edge, relaxed slightly. What's going on? Did you find something? Connell nodded. I did some digging after our conversation with the Queen. I went through the palace archives and found some old correspondence between the royal family and a powerful business syndicate based outside Kajola. It turns out this syndicate has been quietly buying up land and resources in the kingdom over the past few years. The king had been working to stop them, his reforms would have blocked their control. Detective Tond's mind race.
So the king's reforms weren't just about power within the palace. They were about stopping outside forces from taking over Kajola. So Chief Balagan is right. Exactly, and here's the kicker, the syndicate has close ties to Prince Femi. The prince has been using his influence to help them behind the scenes, promising them full access to Kajola's resources once he takes the throne.
Ton's stomach turned as the pieces began to fall into place. Prince Femi had orchestrated his father's death, not just for power but for financial gain. And Olori Mareo. She had likely been complicit, either out of fear of losing her influence or in a desperate bid to protect her son. We need to confront them, Ton said, his voice steady but determined. This ends tonight. Back at the palace, Ton and Connor moved swiftly but cautiously through the halls. The once grand structure now felt like a labyrinth of deceit, every corner potentially hiding another conspirator. They headed toward Prince Femi's chambers, knowing that if they hesitated, they might lose their chance to stop whatever was coming next. When they arrived, they found Prince Femi and Olori Mareo in deep conversation. The prince's face was hard, his mother's eyes full of quiet resolve. The room fell silent as the two turned to face the intruders.
Detective Tan, I can see that you've been busy. Busy uncovering the truth we know about your involvement in the king's death, and your deal with the syndicate and other atrocities you committed, which is another chapter that we will visit later. It's over.
For a moment, neither Femi nor Mareo responded. Then the prince's lips curled into a slow, mocking smile.
You're very brave, Inspector. But you're out of your depth. You think you can stop what's already been set in motion. I'll stop you, else you won't take the throne, not after what you've done. You are going to pay for your crimes.
Femi's smile faded. He glanced at his mother, who nodded slightly, her face filled with a grim determination. Then, before Ton could react, Femi reached for a ceremonial dagger displayed on the wall. Connor moved quickly, stepping between Ton and the prince, his hand on his own weapon. But Femi's eyes burned with rage.
You have no idea what's at stake. Kajola needs strong leadership, and my father was too weak to provide it. I'm securing this kingdom's future. Nobody can stop me, not even my mother.
Before he could lunge, Ton pulled his pistol and aimed it at the prince. Drop the knife, Femi, he ordered, his voice calm but firm. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. For a tense moment, the room was frozen. Then, with a frustrated growl, Femi let the dagger fall to the floor. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Olori Mareo stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. He only did it for Kajola, she whispered, her voice breaking. For our people.
He did not do it for the people of Kajola but for himself. He did it for power and greed. That's not how a king rules.
The next day, news of Prince Femi's arrest spread through Kajola town like wildfire. Olori Mareo, too, was taken into custody, though many in the palace remained shocked that the queen had been part of such a plot. The syndicate's influence was quickly cut off, thanks to the documents Connor had uncovered, and the reforms King Adediran had been pushing for were finally enacted by the council, now under new leadership. Inspector Ton stood in the palace courtyard, watching as the royal guards escorted the disgraced prince and queen away. Kajola would recover from this, but the scars left by the conspiracy would linger for years. The town had been betrayed by those who were supposed to protect it, and trust would take time to rebuild. As he turned to leave the palace grounds, Ton couldn't help but feel that though one chapter had closed, another was just beginning. There is something strange about Olori Mareo and Prince Femi. Compared to other younger princes, Femi is different. He does not look like the late king, nor exhibit any of the king's qualities. I heard that 2 queens had died mysteriously in the palace about 16 years ago. Who and what killed them? I need to visit the Queen Bola in exile.